Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Hunting with a Passion podcast. I'm here with my friend Evan Grimm. We're going to talk about turkeys today since turkey season has either started in your state or here in Pennsylvania. It's starting this weekend, so super pumped about that. But welcome to the podcast, Evan.
Yeah, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So like I said, Evan, we're going to talk about turkey hunting. I know zero about turkey hunting, so that's why you're here. Went one time over at my pap's place and ended up chasing a turkey all the way to the neighbor's field about a mile away. So, so start off telling us a little about yourself, what you do, and all that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania. My dad was a hunter, my brother was a hunter, so I spent a lot of time following my dad around, or mostly actually hunting with my older brother. And we both got into competitive turkey calling when I was 11, so I think my brother was 15 at the time.
Okay.
And we were also pro staffers for Mount Hall game calls. And basically we just learned to talk turkey. And we really enjoyed that. And then we also really enjoyed when the fall would come, going after deer with archery equipment. And also just like anything that would get us outside. That's what we like to do. We were home educated, so we spent a lot of time, like whenever we were done with school, we would just go out in the woods if we didn't have a project going on, and we built forts and stuff like that. So
cool.
That was kind of growing up. And then the last couple of years, I actually I went to school to become an aircraft mechanic and an aircraft pilot. So I'm a certified commercial pilot and an aircraft mechanic. We moved to, myself and my wife moved to Alaska about 3.5 years ago, and since then we've been doing some nonprofit work, helping people with just some of their physical needs, and then also I've been able to chase some of Alaska's big game as well.
Wow, that's really cool. So what type of game have you been able to chase in Alaska?
Caribou, black bear, and moose.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really different experience than hunting in the lower 48. One of the things that I think people probably think about Alaska that isn't accurate is that there's like game behind every tree. And while there is a lot of game in Alaska, there are millions of acres for those animals to be in. So, I mean, if you're not hitting it just right, if you're not at the right place at the right time, you won't see anything.
Okay.
And it's a different type of hunting. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is for me to go hunting in Alaska, I'll drive 3 hours. Like that's normal. 3 hours is like normal, and then some guys are getting in a boat and going for 8 hours after that. So like there's a lot of traveling. Deep. Yes, going real deep after animals.
Wow. So I have a question. How does the public hunting work there in Alaska? Like here in Pennsylvania, we have, state game land set aside to hunt in. How do they have it set up there in Alaska?
Alaska has kind of a conglomeration of state property, and then also Bureau of Land Management, so BLM property. There's also something they have to look out for is property that is owned by native corporations. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to keep, as you're planning your hunt out, keep in mind that there's, these corporations that own vast amounts of property, and it's private property. So you have to have permission to be on that property if you're going to hunt it.
Okay.
So that's one thing that when I first moved out there, I was just looking, I was like, man, there's so much property here. But then once you start kind of figuring out, there's native property as well, you have to keep in mind of that.
Cool.
Well, let's talk turkey.
Okay.
What's in mind?
Yeah, seeing a turkey. All right, so first question is, I shoot a 20 gauge. Most people shoot 12 gauge, but 20 gauge is all I have right now. But what would you say the best turkey load would be for 20 gauge or 12 gauge?
Yeah, well, turkey loads have changed a lot. Years ago, it was just your basic lead shot. Guys would be shooting 6s, lead shot, and I mean, it worked. it worked, but you were kind of limited as far as your. And a lot of guys were shooting the 2 3/4 load on a 12 gauge or a 16 gauge or a 20 gauge, but you're really limited as far as your range. Even my dad, it's kind of like the old mindset of like 30 yards and closer. Whereas now with the turkey loads that we have now, there's tungsten, and tungsten is a lot heavier than lead. So basically what that means is there's more momentum to the load.
Is that a different type of metal?
It's a different type of metal.
Okay.
It's more expensive, but if you're shooting a 2 3/4 or a 3-inch with tungsten and you have a modified turkey choke, guys are shooting all the way up to 60 yards with it. But the tungsten is heavy enough that it has enough momentum to keep going. It's kind of similar to archery and arrow weights and stuff like that. The heavier it is, the more momentum it has, the more it'll carry through. And then another thing that I would say is, regardless of what I would recommend, if you're shooting a lead/copper BB or pellet, I would say probably a 5 or 6 is a good load for it. 20 gauge is fine. As long as you've got like a decent choke on it, 20 gauge is fine. It's got plenty of power now.
Mine has full choke. So
yeah, full choke is great.
Yeah.
One thing that I would say that's important to do is pattern your shotgun. So take it and shoot it at 30 yards. Make sure that you're getting a good amount of BBs inside of a paper plate. And when I say good amount of BBs, if you kind of like draw out a turkey head on it, I'd like to see at least 15 BBs in it.
Okay. Yeah, so how do you get the pattern adjusted when you're shooting at a target? Like if you have full choke or if you have no choke at all, how do you recommend adjusting that?
It's interesting. It's interesting that you ask that, actually, because different loads. So say you're shooting a Remington load and you're not patterning well. If you go over to a Federal or something like that, it might behave a little bit different in the airplane. it might behave a little bit different out of the shotgun. So basically, different power loadings and different velocities, it'll act a little bit different out of your shotgun. And then I think another one is you can modify the choke too. So one thing to think about, if you have like a really tight pattern, some of these tungsten loads, if you're shooting a 3-inch full choke out at 30 yards, your pattern is really only about 10 inches. Like, it's really, really tight.
Yeah.
And so when that turkey comes into like 10, 15 yards, you've got like a softball size pattern. So you gotta like really, really be focused in on your turkey.
Yeah.
And basically, when you're aiming at a turkey, you want to aim for basically right at the wattles at the base of their neck, right where the feathers come up and meet their neck skin. That's right where you want to be, right in that area. That's a lot of damage to a turkey.
Also on the gun, do you prefer like a bead sight or do you like a red dot sight?
I'll be honest with you. I have only shot with bead sight. I know some guys put scopes on, red dots and stuff like that. But for the hunting that we do, I think the hunting that we do, like, we're set up on that turkey before he's even there. So like we've got the gun up, we're set, we're settled in. We're in shooting position usually before he even shows up. And so we're just super steady. And you set that bead where you want and you squeeze that trigger. People that, I think for younger hunters, it probably would be beneficial to probably have a red dot scope or something like that, just for a little bit more visual on it. One thing about the bead sights is if you miss and the turkey starts taking off, you can get another shot off, whereas acquiring that target with a scope on is going to be much more challenging.
Now, I know turkeys have like incredible eyesight. How would you recommend blending in? I've heard people using ground blinds. I've heard guys shooting out of tree stands and stuff like that. Or do you just like the regular old sitting on the ground and stuff like that? So what would you recommend about that?
I've never hunted from a tree stand. One thing that I say that I make sure whenever I go after turkeys is gotta have a face mask that covers your nose and basically all that you can see is your like right around your eyes.
Okay.
I usually wear a ball cap, no color on the ball cap.
Yeah.
So like, so yeah, like no non-natural color, so no blue or anything in the ball cap. Usually I put my hood up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's just to keep the mosquitoes away from my ears.
Right.
But
Because it's springtime.
Because it's springtime. But I mean, I've had successful hunts where I forgot my face mask.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I'll call a turkey. He'll be running in, and then he'll see my face and run off.
Yeah.
So that's a really necessary thing. Another thing, gloves. And basically what that is when the sun shines, especially, I would say you're most likely to probably catch up with a turkey around 9 o'clock in the morning, unless you catch them right off the roost.
Yeah.
But basically when the sun starts to shine and gets brighter, anything that has any white pigment to it, so your skin, is just glowing to them. So you stand out really, really well. So camo gloves, camo face mask, full camo suit. I mean, when I was younger, I'd be hiking around with hiking boots, and I'd have like a little bit of green or blue jeans hanging out of the bottom of my camo because I was growing and my camo suits were too small. Yeah. And I was always concerned about that. That wasn't really that big of a problem. I think it was because basically I tried to sit down with my back against a tree and something growing around me.
Okay.
So if it was a clump of grass or something like that. And I just don't think that the turkeys could see through that to see my pants bottoms. But rubber boots, try to stay away from black. Just because, and what I would say as far as that goes is, if you got dull black, that's one thing, but if you got shiny black, that's another thing.
Yeah.
Like they'll pick up the shiny.
Yeah, like on the bottom of your boots and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the old muck boots, like the old style.
Yeah.
I think they still make them at like Tractor Supply and stuff like that, but they're just a rubber boot that come up and they're completely black and they're shiny when they're new.
Yeah.
So I try to stay away from those.
Okay.
But if you have like brown rubber boots or something like that.
Okay, so let's talk habitat. Like where I grew up, we hunted on farmland, basically farmland turkeys, where they're usually in the field in the mornings and in the field at dusk and all that. It was rolling hills and stuff like that. How would you suggest I adjust hunting, mountain turkeys and stuff like that around here?
So when I think turkeys, I probably have the same picture that a lot of people do. Is this strutting tom out in this field with a couple of heads around them?
Yeah, yeah.
One thing that I've noticed about turkeys is they like high points.
Almost like deer.
Yes, they like ridge points, and they like places that they have good visibility. I have found another thing that turkeys seem to like is if they can get out of the wind. I've seen them try to stay out of the wind or out of the rain, but that varies too because I mean I've seen them out strutting in a pouring rainstorm with lots of wind. So, that kind of varies. But I think generally higher areas. Turkeys like to roost in timbered areas. They like to find mature trees that they can fly up and roost in. So if you can find a spot where there's a field, even if it's on a lower, actually really what's perfect for setting up for turkeys is standing timber and a field on top of the hill. That to me is that's perfect.
Yeah.
Especially if it's got some green in it.
A river bottom maybe.
A river bottom is pretty cool. Sometimes it can be challenging if you're across a creek or across a river from a turkey to get them to come across. But I've called them across the creeks and I've called them across roads too. But generally habitat, higher points, they like the timber for roosting, and then they also like some thick areas. And I found especially the pressured turkeys, especially if you're hunting public land, they're gonna basically stay away from anywhere that there's human pressure. This is especially later on in the season. Yeah,
very similar to deer almost.
Very, very similar to deer. But also the hens go to brushy areas to lay their eggs too. Okay. So if you find an area that has a mix of all those, of standing timber, field of some sort, or some sort of food source. They also like acorns and stuff like that. It's very similar to deer.
Yeah.
I mean,
they live together. So.
They do live together, and then the hens just like the brushy stuff for their for their nests. I'm trying to think. I mean, that's really what I look for. And also another thing that I would say, and I say the same thing about deer hunting, you can find the perfect spot and they won't be there. Mm-hmm. You got to find where the turkeys are. Yeah. And you can be walking through a spot, hit a locator call, and it's just like the most, like, I don't think there's going to be a turkey here, and there'll be a turkey there. Yeah. So, the turkeys travel. It's just kind of being in the right place at the right time. Yeah. But generally, higher points, some sort of feed source, green's really good, especially early spring. And then somewhere around, something that's a little brushy.
Okay. So now that we talked about habitat, what would you recommend, like a strategy with decoys? How do you feel about decoys, using them? I'm probably going to use a hen this Saturday and see how that works. Like you suggested, on a ridge. In fact, you explaining that about the field, that's ideally where I was out this past weekend looking for turkeys, and did a couple owl hoots and stuff like that, and heard a gobbler up on a ridge close to the field. So looking to do that. But what would you say a good strategy with decoys, or even not using decoys? What would you say about that?
I've had mixed results with decoys, I'll be honest with you. I've had turkeys coming in on a line, see a decoy, and run away. So for me, it's like, I'm really hesitant. I think the biggest thing for me as a turkey hunter is making sure that my calling sounds good. Yeah. And it's one thing to be able to, put a mouth call in and have perfect yelps. Yeah. But it's another thing to think about, all right, what actually makes sense for this time when I'm calling a turkey? Like, what would that gobbler expect to hear from a hen? Yeah. And then also making sure my calls are good, but also making sure I'm set up in an area that like I have good cover, that they're not going to see me, and a place that's semi-realistic for a turkey to be calling from.
It's going to be really different for me because, I'm used to deer hunting where you can call some, but not a whole lot. But like when you turkey hunt, that's the main thing you do is, you never know they're going to pop up. So you're always like calling, whether it's a shot call or, a hen call or whatever, that's going to be different, trying to do that whereas with deer, you're like trying to sit still and not give away your location as much as possible. I mean, turkey is the same thing, but you're still vocalizing and talking with them. So that's going to be really different for me to try this year.
My normal go-to is a mouth call. Okay. But I will say that is primarily because I was involved in competitive turkey calling. Okay. So I'm really comfortable with a mouth call in my mouth. Yeah.
I like the fact that it's hands-free, too.
It is hands-free, and I like that, too. One of the things I like about the mouth call is you have a wide range of vocalizations. So you can make it pretty soft, or you can make it really loud. You can do cutting on it. You can do clucks. You can do purrs. You can do basically everything on it. Keys. Everything, I mean, I've heard some guys that can gobble on them, too. I can't do that. But
I tried that today in some I was like, I think you like shake your face or something. I don't know. It looked really stupid.
Yeah, but that's why I like the mouth call. I'm just super comfortable with it. Yeah. Early morning, I think a slate call is a good idea.
It's usually a little bit louder, isn't it? It carries.
Slate is actually, it's a softer.
Oh, is it softer?
It's softer. I mean, it could be argued that they're loud, but their actual tone is just soft. It's not like a harsh sound. I would avoid going out crack of dawn with a box call and yelp, making a ton of noise. They'll shut off. I've had that happen before. I learned that the hard way. I guess kind of go over that. Generally, when turkeys are still on the roost in the morning, their vocalizations are pretty soft. So you hear some yelps here and there. Gobblers will still be gobbling. Yeah. They'll be making a racket. But mostly the hens are a little bit softer all the way up until they do their fly down. and then you'll hear them up in the tree getting excited and flapping their wings and then hitting the ground. And then after that, they'll be excited for a little bit, and then they'll just quiet down. That's been my experience. The hens will quiet down again. Yeah. And then once you get to once the sun's up, they start making a little bit more noise. I've actually had some really fun times just kind of communicating back and forth with hens.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. I kind of, I've been able to listen to turkeys a lot. Actually, when I was growing up, I raised turkeys. So I would interact with them a little bit. And domesticated turkeys are way different. Their sounds are different and everything like that. But you do get an idea of, what to expect from a turkey. So yeah, softer in the morning, and then as the sun comes up, I like to listen. If I can hear a hen that's making a racket, that's when I start making a racket. And then I like to interact with the hen.
Yeah.
I've called hens in before, and usually when the hen comes in, there's a gobbler that's looking for that hen.
It's like a live decoy.
Yeah. And so, but I would generally say once the sun's up, and basically once it's up and, you can start seeing the sun hitting, if you're looking at a field, the sun starts hitting the field. That's a pretty good time that you can start making more noise. They usually quiet down a little bit in the middle of the day too.
Yeah.
And then in the evening, I'll be honest, I haven't really hunted the evening all that much.
That's all I hear is most guys are like, yeah, we hunt in the mornings and stuff like that. But
well, it wasn't even, the thing is I think it was 6 or 7 years ago that you could actually start hunting turkeys in the evening in Pennsylvania. So it's a relatively new thing, and you got guys that, their habit has always been just hunting in the morning, and, we haven't really got out of that habit.
Yeah.
So.
Now, do you have to do, get up super early with turkeys? Because I know, deer, you got to be in there, before they even start moving and off their feet.
Yeah, generally I like to be in to my spot when it's breaking day.
Okay. Which with the time change is nice now, because it doesn't get till 8 o'clock, so you can sleep in.
Yeah.
That's something I was like, I love spring turkey hunting, because you don't have to get up till 6 instead of 4 or 5.
Yeah, I like to get in when it's breaking day, and part of that is I like to, if I get there early, I'll just I'll stand outside of my vehicle and just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And
maybe a few locator calls.
Yeah, I like to owl hoot.
Yeah.
So since we're on the subject of locator calls, how would you recommend, a perfect scenario? What would you recommend doing, your perfect scenario of using a locator call? I've heard you can use them most of the time in the evening to get them on the roost, or I've heard you can do it in the morning, to get them to see where they're at if they're not gobbling right away early in the morning. But what would you recommend on that?
Yeah, that's going to vary by who you listen to.
Yeah.
So I use an owl call basically from the time that it breaks day, even before. And actually that's kind of an interesting thing too, because I used to stand from my parents' place when I was a kid, and owl hoot and the gobbler, in the evening, owl hoot and the gobblers across the road and over on the neighbor's field 500 yards away would be gobbling. So, but yeah, I would say even before it gets light, really, you can start using an owl hoot just to see if they're awake and gobbling. And then I would owl hoot all the way up until basically until that sun starts peeking up over the horizon. And then at that point, I'm usually in my spot and set up calling.
Yeah.
And then I've had good success getting gobblers to gobble at 10 o'clock with a crow call. And again, it varies who you talk to, but crow call for me has worked pretty well, even on public land. So, and that's actually mostly when I'm hunting public land, I don't have a bird pinned down, so I get in there in the morning, listen, and I might have an encounter in the morning early, but not. It usually takes me 3 or 4 times having a turkey within range to be able to close the deal. That just seems to be the way that it is.
Yeah.
So I might have an encounter in the morning, and then I might be repositioning on that turkey around 10 o'clock, and using a crow call works really well for that. Another thing, and you gotta be somewhat careful with this, but I'll pop my mouth call in my mouth, and I'll just but I'll kind of warm up and then get excited, and then cool down.
Make it like a scenario.
Make it more of a scenario instead of just giving a whole bunch of noise right off the bat, just to make it more realistic.
I think that one time that I went was my problem, because like when I went out, I was like, oh, maybe it's hitting it hard and loud as could be.
Yeah.
I was getting gobble reaction, but with the owl hoot and all that, the locator call, is that just basically, as I said, location call? Is that just mainly to figure out where they're at, or I've even heard it called a shot gobble. Shot gobble.
Yeah, they'll shot gobble. So basically, if you get a hot gobbler, you can literally go to your car, hit the horn, and they might gobble. Literally, like if they're really.
It's like us yelling if someone scares us. Pretty.
yeah. I mean, pretty similar. Basically, that's the idea. That's what the crow call. That's why they gobble with the crow call. It's just. I don't know if it's them asserting some dominance or something like that, but that's kind of...
Okay. Because I was hearing that about the owl, too, because I was like, why do they do that? And I was reading a little bit, and they were saying something about how, like, turkeys like to assert dominance on the owl and stuff like that.
Sure.
They're both apparently, like, what do you call it? Like, they have their own spots, and they like to, whatever. But I didn't know owls were that way, too. But kind of they're, like, predatory, like, their own... area or whatever.
Sure.
So what would you say, speaking of calls, is the best way to learn how to use a mouth call? I'm using a slate call right now just because it's, they recommend that is like the easiest thing to use. I also have a box call that I might use to create a scenario, if you know what I mean. But like, what would you recommend how to learn using the mouth diaphragm call?
Yeah, so I was at the Harrisburg Outdoor Show and went to talk to the pro staff that I used to be with, and picked up the Drama Queen, which is a call that I used to compete with, and I was just I was talking to the guys, and I was like, man, I just love the sound that I get out of this, and the guy was like, yeah, nobody gets the sound out of that you do. So I think part of it is people have a different palate in their mouth. Mm-hmm. So that determines, this is just kind of a disclaimer before I get into some techniques, that determines to some extent the noise that you're going to get out of your call. Another thing that I would say is pressure. Pressure is going to determine what type of tone you're getting out of your call. So the more pressure you put on it, the higher pitch it's going to be. Okay. The less pressure you put on it, the raspier, generally, the more raspy it will become, and the deeper tone it will become.
Do you want it to be raspy?
It depends. I generally like to have I can't even really explain it. I like to be somewhere around probably about 75% pressure to get a pretty crisp call, and then I'll lower my pressure a little bit just to get that little bit of rasp. Because that makes it a little bit realistic, really. And then as far as I was saying in my video, what a lot of people will do is they'll put that call in their mouth and they'll just go and just
that's all I do.
And it's easy and it's great to get started. What I grew up doing was whelp, whelp, whelp. And that's just basically mouthing that as you're calling. So it's, I wish I had a mouth call to kind of distinguish that, but basically as you're doing your yelp, every time that you start your yelp, it's whelp, 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 whelp. And then, but also there's a mix to that too, because a Jake's going to sound different.
Younger and
generally I just like to and this is where it gets hard for me to describe too, because it goes from a whelp, something that I did a lot when I was competitive was help, 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 help. And that just enabled me to just get a little bit of a twist on the, not necessarily a twist, but it just gave me a different tone out of that call. And so that also, I think what I have seen with younger callers is they're hesitant to move their lips.
Yeah, I don't at all. I just...
And also I've seen some callers where they'll actually clench their teeth when they're calling. And that's going to really mess with the sound that you get out of the call.
So you're saying you gotta be more relaxed.
Be relaxed. And then, something that I used to do when I was practicing was I'd actually like kind of hold my hand up and do this. And it just kind of helped me psychologically to think, all right, I need to be closing my mouth at the end of the yelp. And so that was one thing, close your mouth at the end of the yelp to an extent. Not that your lips have to close or anything like that, but basically just kind of act like you're actually making the turkey sound. And then as far as cutting goes, again, a lot of people just like that's their cut. Mm-hmm. And the way to get that crisp is by closing your mouth. So actually just kind of, it's kind of a pit is how you're going to get more of an accurate cut out of that. Purrs are challenging. And I've had people tell me you got to roll the back of your throat. And
how
so,
do you roll the back of your throat?
And yeah, that's the same thing that I thought when I was told that. But basically, kind of like if you were going to imitate like a growl or something like that, in the back of your throat's kind of like that. Yeah. That's kind of the sound that that's kind of the, that's the heart.
So it's almost like short little...
It's like a vibration in the back of your throat. And at the same time, you're still doing that shh that makes that call actually put out some noise.
I think I've done it on accident and didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. And actually, when I was a pro staffer, I used to actually start people on the purr because for some reason it was like for people that could not get a sound out of a call. For some reason it was easier for them to actually pick it up with a purr, and then they could because your tongue's
harder, so everything else probably just can't.
Yeah. Well, your tongue's kind of in the right spot when you're rolling the back of your throat when you're doing that kind of growl type thing. And then basically what I learned was like, the entire time that I'm doing this, it's basically just kind of shh. It's like as if you're putting your finger up to your mouth and going shh.
Yeah.
Like that's the actual like that's what's going on in your mouth for the most part. Yeah.
Cool.
So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Yeah, that was actually pretty helpful.
And then on top of that, I would say a call doesn't sound good until it's about 5 hours broken in. And so basically that means you need to have that call in your mouth for about 5 hours before those fibers are going to loosen up completely, and you're going to get the accurate call sound. So that's why people I'll get into call care a little bit for the mouth call, but that's why people will buy something and be like, man, this sounds great, and then like they're on it all the time, and they're like, man, I can't get the sound out of this that I used to get. It's because those fibers loosened up.
So you want them to loosen up?
I like them to loosen up because then I have a dependable call that's going to put out the same noise unless I set it out in the sun. That'll rot it like right away.
Yeah.
So those are just some general things. It's going to sound you're going to get really more used to your call in about 5 hours. It's going to get broken in. It's going to sound really good. And then whenever I'm done at the end of the season, I'll take my mouth call and I'll basically put some mouthwash on it, and then I'll freeze it. I'll pop it in the freezer.
That is really interesting. I've never heard that. The freezer trick, making it the reeds tighter so it sounds crisper and everything. That's cool. I'll have to try that. So, well, thanks for coming on. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. You can find Evan on Instagram, Paddle and Tine, and then also his podcast on YouTube, Paddle and Tine as well. Wanted to thank him for coming in and hope you guys have a successful turkey season.